Shalom and welcome to the Israel Policy Pod. I'm Neri Zilber, a journalist based in Tel Aviv and a policy advisor to Israel Policy Forum. A lot to discuss this week with our regular catch-up with Israel Policy Forum's very own Chief Policy Officer Michael Koplow and Shira Efron, the Diane and Guilford Glazer Foundation Senior Fellow and Director of Research. We'll be discussing the start of the long-threatened IDF offensive into Gaza, the growing international pressure on Israel, which really ratcheted up this week, the humanitarian situation inside the Strip, and the big question hovering over everything: what, if anything, does Donald Trump want? Just a bit of housekeeping before we start. We're now a video podcast. Yes, we're on video, live and direct. So if you like to watch us as you listen to us, you can check us out on YouTube, and of course, audio version still available wherever you get your podcasts. Please subscribe and leave a good rating if the mood strikes you. Let's get to Michael and Shira. Hi, Michael. Hi, Shira. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, guys.
Hi, Neri.
First one on video.
Yeah. But
Now
I'm
I can
always
see,
smiling like that when we start the conversation.
But now I and everyone else can see your bright, beautiful faces and not just your voices. So it's a market improvement. A lot to get into this week. We're going to go around the horn on the big issues, really, literally, of this past week. And it's been a while since you two were last on. Can you remember when?
A month ago?
Right
2 months
after
ago?
February. So a lot to cover this week, primarily in and around and about Gaza. And just for the record, for our listeners, we're recording this Wednesday afternoon Tel Aviv time, just in case anything happens between now and when this episode goes up. But I wanted to start here. Over the weekend, the IDF officially launched its new offensive against Hamas in Gaza. Major airstrikes across the Strip, 5 divisions of IDF infantry and armor pushing in, a general evacuation order issued to Khan Yunis, the second biggest city in the Gaza Strip in the south. Also, the talks that had been ongoing in Doha, in Qatar, for a new ceasefire for hostage deal have effectively stalled, it seems, at least for now, after there was some glimmer of optimism late last week. So first question to you, Michael, were you surprised by both of these developments? No ceasefire deal, even if a temporary one on the one hand, and the start of this long-threatened Israeli offensive into Gaza on the other.
I wasn't surprised by either. As both of you and everyone who ever listens to us knows, I'm generally pessimistic about the prospects of getting to a deal, certainly under the current circumstances. So despite the chatter last week about the sides being close and people compromising, I never bought it. Never say never, and suppose something can still happen. And obviously a lot of it is going to depend on what the Trump administration does and how hard they push for it. But I was not surprised that the two sides are still not agreeing. And with the offensive, I think it remains to be seen just how wide-ranging it's going to be. You know, you noted the divisions they're moving in. So far, it seems like we're still in the phase of mostly airstrikes. And maybe at some point they will do what they've said they're going to do, which is move into Gaza in full force and take territory. But at least for now, it's unclear to me what the point of this is. I don't understand what people think the real motivation for this operation is, because it's blindingly clear that it's not going to get the hostages back. We know the numbers on those, right? That there's no ambiguity. It's 148 hostages who have come back through negotiations or quote unquote goodwill gestures, and it's 8 hostages who've been rescued by the IDF. So this isn't going to rescue the hostages. I don't view it as an effort to really put pressure on Hamas for negotiations, because at least according to reporting, Hamas has started to soften some of what it's asking for, and the Israelis haven't budged at all. Not to mention that Netanyahu, in some senses, keeps on moving the goalposts about what would be required, right? It isn't now, it's certainly not only about releasing the hostages. It's also about Hamas leaders going to exile. It's also about them laying down their arms. It's also about, after that happens, Israel remaining in Gaza until there's full disarmament of the territory. So he's not exactly creating wiggle room in a way that Hamas can actually meet. And when it comes to using this to defeat Hamas militarily, there's really no evidence that we've seen that that's going to happen either. The top leadership has been killed repeatedly. They're still fighting. They're still recruiting people. This is just going to be a counterinsurgency. So I think it's time to drop the fiction that one more operation and just more force and a new maneuver where this time you hold territory, that's going to lead to complete Hamas defeat and surrender. I just don't buy it. So where this all leads, especially when just in the last few days we have Trump himself clearly losing patience, and we have the Europeans threatening new sanctions, and all sorts of really bad developments without evidence that this operation is going to accomplish anything that it's supposed to accomplish, I just don't see the point. And we'll see how far it goes, but it doesn't seem like a smart exercise to me.
So save your thoughts about both Trump and international pressure. We'll get into both those issues later on, trust me. And in terms of achieving the goals or the motivations, well, the Israeli government would beg to differ, obviously. The Israeli government still maintains in every statement that the goal of the operation is to both get the hostages out and to defeat Hamas. As you all know, and as this podcast has tried to explain for months now, both those objectives are likely mutually exclusive for all the reasons that we know. Shira, the start of the operation, the lack of a new ceasefire deal, did it come as a surprise to you?
So yes and no. First of all, I do want to qualify. There's a lot of talk about the military operation. For the most part, in terms of, they're mostly airstrikes. There are those divisions. Now it's 3 divisions who are sort of like posted in the territory. But as far as I know, and again, I'm not like on the maps, there's not actually a lot of active fighting at the moment. So it's more the talk of actual fighting that is happening, and there have been evacuation orders. It does not mean that the Palestinians in Gaza are not suffering from the threat of war, but in terms of how much active fighting there is on the moment on the ground with going into territory areas, right? This operation is not supposed to, be launched against the same targets we've been through. I will try to be diplomatic about it, 9 times already, right? This is not the idea. The idea is to go to areas where there hasn't been a ground operation so far. So we're talking about the central areas, right? The Boasi area, which was defined by Israel as the humanitarian zone. And we know it was infiltrated by Hamas. And actually Hamas kind of like was the sovereign or sort of managed law and order in that lawless area for a long time. This has not happened yet. So I think we need to be just mindful of that. I am a bit surprised how quickly things did turn. I think there are a lot of respected analysts that I respect, and also people who are officials within the system, that when we had last, I think, Mary, we spoke on Sunday about it, were convinced that this was going to some sort
Not
of...
on a microphone, not on a podcast.
Not on the podcast. We spoke on the phone, of course.
Yeah, that also happens.
All the time.
In real life, as the kids say.
But they were people, and those are people who were pessimistic all along, that actually when the second ceasefire happened were... So anyway, I had good reasons, I think, to be more optimistic about it for a variety of reasons. First and foremost was the U.S. pressure, right? Donald Trump, but not just Trump, right? There's Witkoff and Buller all of a sudden, and Hamas playing a very smart move with releasing Idan Alexander without essentially requesting anything in return, right? Which I thought was wise on their part. it seemed also that if Hamas continues to play its cards right, they can call the Israeli bluff, because going back to where we are in the ground operation, all polls indicate that this has no public support in Israel. There's some people on the right, even those who want to see Hamas, which is basically all of us, right? No one wants to see Hamas there. But even those that see this as a priority, the 70% of the Israeli public, plus or minus, want to see the hostages back in, understanding what Michael, I won't repeat it, but what Michael basically said, right? This war is to no end, and it's not going to achieve its stated objectives. So what's the point? Knowing very well that this is going to lead to the death of more and more IDF soldiers. We've just seen in the last couple of days, right? Even with absent the fighting, we're seeing soldiers dying there, more injuries, the state of PTSD. And then with this diplomatic tsunami, which I'm sure we'll get into in a moment, plus with the Trump pressure, I just thought, and sort of in addition to that, domestic issues with the vote in Knesset committee, which did not allow for an extension of the war, Tzav Shmone, which is the 8th warrant, the warrant that calls soldiers into war in a way that is funded by the state, not by the IDF. Just this confluence of factors made me, and I think some others, think that this must go in a certain direction. And, Netanyahu being Netanyahu is going to continue threatening the military war and do a little bit of everything, nothing immediate, but we're heading into a positive direction, in my view, which would be toward a ceasefire. What happened was a very quick switch, which of course came also with probably President Trump, I don't know if
leaving
he was
the region
or from the cloud of like a royalty where he was in the Gulf. This issue, other issues are becoming a top priority for the administration. Hamas basically saying they have been more flexible, but this is not new. But where they have been consistent all along, you got to give it to them, has been on this needs to lead to the end of war with guarantees. And there's no reason to think that with this Israeli threat, if I don't kill you today, but I'll kill you in 3 days. Why would they agree to be more flexible in the negotiations? It's sort of, and I think where I was less or not less surprised, but where I realized things were not heading in the right direction was with the Israeli decision to allow humanitarian assistance to go in. Hardly insufficient. I'm sure we're going to get into it, but to me, if there was a ceasefire imminent, right, Israel would push the humanitarian assistance going in a little bit by a few more days. Right, there's no reason to give it now. They can give it as part of their reward for a ceasefire. The fact that they were willing to cave to pressure to bring it in, to me, was an indication that the ceasefire is heading away. Now, we're talking on Wednesday. Maybe by Saturday, things here could change. But it doesn't look like it's going in the right direction. And all depends on how hard Trump, turns the screws. So we're back.
If he turns the screws, and again, we'll speculate later on in this episode. And as you know, Shira, I wasn't that surprised that the offensive was launched, and I wasn't that surprised, as Michael alluded to, that the talks didn't work out. I took this Israeli government at its word that it wanted to launch this operation, and that the threat of the operation wasn't just mere words. It was a leverage play to apply pressure on Hamas to essentially cave to Israeli demands to give up half the remaining living hostages and perhaps some of the deceased hostages. And Israel would be willing to halt the war for maybe 2 months. But even as Netanyahu said, I believe last week, he said, we'll take those hostages if Hamas wants to, and we'll pause the war. It'll only be a pause, and then we'll go back to launching this exact same full-scale offensive. We're going to reconquer the Strip, and we're going to destroy Hamas. So he says it out loud. If you were Hamas, what incentive do you have to agree to anything, truly? And so I didn't really see where the zone of possible agreement could come in unless there was external pressure on Israel and also on Hamas's end. But even Hamas obviously has a lot less to lose than Israel.
Right, but he did say, Neri, he did say these things, but I think for the first time ever, we heard Netanyahu quoted that they were discussing all different models for a ceasefire, including a model for ending the war. He did say that. And this was an interesting thing that everyone picked up on.
I think that was
sort of like as a positive signal that maybe.
I saw the same statement as you did, Shira, as did everyone else. That statement was meant for one audience and one audience only, and I think that was the U.S. negotiators, Steve Witkoff, because they were in Doha at the time that the statement came out, and they were trying to find some formula to either halt the war and get a temporary ceasefire with an eye to negotiating a permanent end to the war, or maybe a bigger package to fully end the war. And so Netanyahu, I think, in his own mind, had to put out that statement and be like, all right, I'm willing to talk about everything, including ending the war, but these are our demands. And those demands are very difficult if you're Hamas to accept.
And frankly, I'm totally with you, Neri. And it was designed to do what Netanyahu always tries to do, which is, he thinks he can say some stuff and he'll pull the wool over the eyes of people who don't know any better. And I think that's exactly what he's trying to do with Trump and Witkoff. He thinks that he can that perhaps they don't know him well enough yet, or they're not sick of him enough yet to kind of reject what he says at face value the way lots of Democrats have for years. And so he's playing his usual games. And I really I really fail to see how there's a credible argument right now that this operation is designed to create pressure for a better negotiated outcome. I don't see how it's possible. It's, as I said, it's belied by everything that Netanyahu and plenty of other government ministers say and do.
I don't think any of us, we don't disagree with you. And it's very clear this continued war, we know what it serves, right? It allows for it not ending the war is where the Israeli government continues as is. There's no national inquiry, commission of inquiry, right? There are no elections, all these things that Netanyahu doesn't want. And also this trial. There's no question with that. But, at one point, you think if you don't have enough troops, right? Let's say you have enough reservists to come in for other fronts, but you have thousands of soldiers in the West Bank as well. You still have the North, right? I mean, you need to sustain all this. We might be in an era, and a couple of weeks ago, someone spoke to me abroad. A European official asked about the possibility of an Israeli strike on Iran, even as the U.S. negotiates. And I said, of course not. Israel would never attack in Iran without a U.S. green light, which
Correct.
I still, subscribe to this view and think that there's a limitation of what Israel can do without U.S. backup. And a strike in Iran, it's also right, you need U.S. support for a variety of military stuff. I'm not that I trust everything is in the paper, but there's a really concerning report of CNN that intelligence showed that Israel is still planning for a strike in Iran, despite the negotiations and against U.S. pressure. So we might be in a situation where it's just like everything we think of calculations, and do you have the people and the public support and the reservists and the U.S. and the international community and BDS, and whereas I would think that Netanyahu, even though he's not implementing a policy that I support, right? But you would think that he's be susceptible to all these arguments and make the calculations. We might be in a different world, and I don't know. Connecting the two to me is very concerning because there is no public support for this in Israel, right? What about the soldiers? Who's supposed to occupy Gaza and hold on to it?
So just on that point, I assume Netanyahu and this government believe that they have enough support in their right-wing base to continue the war and to even escalate the war. And that's what matters to them. And with regard to that CNN report about Israel making preparations to strike Iran, Shira, I can't believe I'm saying this, but don't believe everything you read in the media, even if it's coming from our dear friends at CNN. It's, you guys know, we've seen these reports now for over 15 years, that every time there's some sliver of negotiations, either Israel or the Americans leak that Israel is now really, really close to actually pulling the trigger and striking Iran. It wasn't true at any point in the past 15 years. I definitely don't think it's true now as Donald Trump is negotiating with the Iranians. I think there's a 0% chance. 0% chance Netanyahu gives a green light for Israeli strike on Iran as the negotiations continue and in the face of what Donald Trump wants. So on that front, we should be maybe a bit calmer until not. But your overall point, I agree with Shira, that with what army, right? That if you actually go and continue this offensive up to what they're promising to do, which is completely reoccupy Gaza for an unlimited amount of time, you're going to be battling an insurgency there, whether you want to call it Hamas or not, for months and years to come, on top of the other fronts. Very, very difficult to see, but this is the glide path we're on. I don't see an out for Netanyahu politically and strategically, given everything he's promised. So that's the concerning thing. But we have to move on. Yeah, the people watching on video should have just seen Shira's face. Yes, she is also.
No,
she's also exasperated.
I don't think so. If you look at the support among also the right wing, there is there's a very hardcore base, the Smotrich and Ben-Gvir base that is pro these things. It's not the vast majority of Israelis, even on the right. And I think when we connect this to the diplomatic tsunami that is happening, right? We talk about the UK, you write for a British newspaper. We're not talking about a sort of like random country that Israel doesn't have. It has defense tongues. Israel buys arms from the UK. I mean, things are happening in a way that, going down this course, which I think is still reversible. I was making this face. Maybe we should be on video. I was making this face because I don't think we're at the point of there's no turning back. I do think there's always a turning back, and Netanyahu is the master of that, right? He's the good thing about like 1 step forward, 2 steps back, and do a little bit of this, talk about it. There is a way back, which he can take, and I hope for the sake of everyone that he does, because otherwise it will be very, very difficult, including to his base, to live in this country.
I don't think he cares. I genuinely don't think that he cares. I think that 10 years ago, I would have agreed with this, with your analysis, that he always finds the exit point before the disaster, and that all the things that we've been talking about now for the last 20 minutes piling up would get him to turn back. I'm not confident of that at all. He's been doing this now. He's been doing deeply unpopular things now. It's not even just since October 7th. It's obviously before. Deeply unpopular things that Israelis don't want, that have caused him problems with now, 2 U.S. presidents in a row, that are causing deep problems with the Europeans. It's all of it. And I don't think he cares.
So this was my point about the Iran report, which I said, I think it's unlikely, but we might be in a world where Netanyahu no longer cares. And this is, I don't have, I'm not a psychologist. I don't know what he cares about, what he doesn't care about. I do hope that at one point this madness will stop.
I was just going to say that Netanyahu in the past always stopped the war before Israel got into trouble, even in the face of major opposition and disagreement amongst his own right-wing base. And he was always able to sell it, and he always did it ahead of time. And now he's digging deeper and deeper. Okay, we'll be right back after this brief message.
Israel Policy Forum is a policy organization rooted in the Jewish community. Our mission is to build support for a secure, Jewish, democratic Israel through a viable resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, advancing pragmatic U.S. policy towards the conflict, U.S.-Israel relations, and regional diplomacy among policymakers and community leaders. We promote policy measures endorsed by credible security experts, develop analysis and commentary, and convene programs that engage and educate leaders across the political, denominational, and generational spectrums. Our Young Professionals initiative, IPF at TEED, works to elevate the discourse among next-generation leaders by building community and facilitating engaging programs related to Israeli-Palestinian affairs. To learn more about our work, visit us online at israelpolicyforum.org and follow us on social media. If you rely on Israel Policy Forum for credible and nuanced analysis, please make a tax-deductible gift today at ipf.li/supportthepod or at the Support the Show link in the show notes.
But that brings us to our next topic, which Shira, as they say in journalism, signposted very well, which is the international context within which all of this is happening. What did you call it? A diplomatic tsunami. I don't know if we're there quite yet, but we have seen just in the last couple of days growing international pressure on Israel to both halt the offensive in Gaza and allow the reentry of humanitarian aid back into the Strip. We'll get into the aid issue in just a minute, but in terms of the growing international outcry, we've seen the UK, France, Germany issue this very, very strong letter warning Israel that they would take, quote unquote, concrete steps against Israel if Israel didn't stop the offensive. And then we saw yesterday, Tuesday, the UK government suspend negotiations with Israel over a new free trade agreement. And we also saw, I assume at the encouragement of the Macron government in Paris, the European Union say that they would reassess the very important association agreement that the EU has with Israel. Not good stuff, to say the least. Israel, for its part, obviously rejected all of this criticism, saying that there was a huge prize given to Hamas by these various Western states, that this was still a war of civilization over barbarism, and that the British mandate ended 77 years ago. So the Israeli position is very clear. It doesn't want to hear it at all. So Shira, just circling back to the point you started making earlier, do you think this week is really a watershed moment for the international community's patience with Israel? I mean, is that the way you see it?
Definitely. So I will just say that I get to meet people from outside of Israel pretty frequently with lots of conferences and meetings with officials and non-officials. And I think I told you both, I was in Europe, in a European city 2 weeks ago on a session with mostly officials from Arab countries and Europe, very small meeting. And I came back and I was shocked. I have heard language that I've never heard on Israel before, including from representatives of the important countries you mentioned, right? And when you hear Brits talk like that in France, it's not, we can dismiss, right? Let's dismiss the Swedes, Scandinavians. No, it was from countries that we are dependent on for a variety of things. And I was shocked, and I spoke to some people about it in Israel. I think in addition to that, these are at the verge of suspensions of agreements and threats, and Europeans, we can joke that they, what are they going to do to us? They're going to condemn. Well, whatever. But I think what is missing is that decision by the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world, to divest from a series of Israeli companies, and not the ones that it's Paz, which is one of the biggest oil companies because it operates in the settlements. Bank Hapoalim, one of the biggest banks, branches in the U.S. Bank Hapoalim, Teva, one of the biggest pharmaceuticals in the world. So you're missing, I think it's $1.8 trillion. That's what's worth the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. They divested, or maybe they haven't divested from Bank Hapoalim, but they basically said that they're divesting for a variety of Israeli companies. And they're holding on to, they're holding on to, they have stocks of these companies, Teva and Bank Hapoalim and chemicals and other things, but they're starting divestments. There's also the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Ireland. In Japan, you have politicians calling not to sell bonds of the Israeli government. All these things, I think that we're going to see, we've seen the downgrading of Israel's credit history right throughout this war, sequence of downgrades. This is going to affect our lives. It's going to affect the value of the Israeli currency. It's going to affect the debt, right? How we finance our debt. It's going to affect the discount that is attached to the Israeli company bonds. And, these are companies that basically support all our livelihoods. So I think it's not just threats. I think things are
Concrete
happening.
steps.
And ironically, I would say that I think what gave the Europeans the sort of freedom to say those things that they said in closed doors is Trump, right? All these reports about whether they're accurate or not accurate, about Trump losing his patience from Israel, all of a sudden it unleashed the European criticism on Israel. It would be pretty ironic if Israel is what brings the Europeans and the Trump administration together. I don't know that we're there yet, but I'm more concerned than I've been before, because basically what they're saying is we've let you do whatever you want for almost 20 months. We let you do things that are against our values, including in the humanitarian stuff, right? Which we might be able to get to on this conversation. But enough is enough. What are you doing? What is the next step? And we go back right to this offensive that Israel reportedly is launching, hasn't fully started yet, but reportedly launching, continuing the war. The statements that any land we occupy will never be returned, right? Which means Jewish settlements occupying Gaza forever. And of course, on the how we consider the lives of Palestinians there. So I'm concerned.
Michael?
It should definitely, of course, be concerning. And I hate to see these countries divest from Israel and from Israeli companies. But the Israeli government response is just completely bonkers, if not outright offensive. The idea that if you're a European country, or anyone for that matter, and you support more assistance, humanitarian assistance going to Gaza, and you criticize Israel for not doing it, the idea that because Hamas has the same position, that means that you are now on the side of Hamas. Okay, you know what position Hamas has as well. It's that there should be an all-out war on the Palestinian Authority to try to collapse it. Guess who's doing that? The Israeli government. So is the Israeli government now on Hamas's side too? Because they want the same thing. I mean, it's a stupid, right? It's a stupid, infantile argument, and the idea that you have the Israeli prime minister and the foreign minister going around making these arguments as if they're social media trolls, as if their job is to rally rally people online. It's ridiculous.
But I'll just interrupt you for a two-finger caveat. They're making these criticisms, and they're rejecting the criticisms as if we're in October of 2023, and these countries are making these arguments, which is not the case. That all these governments were hugely supportive of the Israeli war effort coming out of October 7th. It's just that after 19 months of pretty brutal war, they want to see a different path taken.
Right, and it's the same way. It's the same way on the war itself, and on this new Merkavot Gideon operation, right? Gideon's chariots. Israel is conducting lots of airstrikes across Gaza. To me, this looks like what happened in October 2023. In October 2023, the death toll was terrible, but it as awful as it was, it made sense because Hamas had just done this horrific thing, and their leadership was still intact, and you still had 33,000 Hamas fighters, and they were talking about doing it again if given the opportunity. It's not reasonable to 19 months later do the exact same thing in light of everything that's gone on and act as if everybody should be supporting it in the same way, and that the justification is exactly as it was then. And the Israeli government just wants a blank check to do anything and everything, no matter what's going on the ground, no matter what the circumstances are, no matter what time has elapsed, no matter what lessons have been learned. And
no matter
I
the
just
domestic Israeli diplomatic context, political
Right.
context either, which
That
everyone
too.
follows very closely as well.
Right. And I just don't understand why they think that anyone is, aside from the kind of the most hardcore supporters of this government, I don't understand why they think that anybody is going to buy it. Shira, on the kind of intersection between the Europeans and Trump, I actually wonder. You were saying that you think that the emerging daylight between Trump and Netanyahu and the U.S. and Israeli government maybe is kind of giving them a permission slip. I wonder actually if there's something else going on, which is that because the United States is still perceived as being in Israel's corner, and in the past there was only so far the Europeans were willing to go if the U.S. wasn't going to support it. I almost wonder if when you look at the UK, France, and Canada, if this is their way of standing up to Trump and signaling that they're going to go their own way, and even if the United States is not where they are, they're annoyed enough with Trump to kind of now do their own thing and form their own coalition. But I don't know. That's just speculation on my part.
But Michael, on that point, you sit in DC usually when you're not traveling. Have you seen any comment or condemnation by Trump administration officials or anyone else in DC of the steps the Europeans and the others have taken in the last couple of days?
No, I haven't yet. But we'll see what they say. And I do wonder if this leads to a renewed effort for some sort of resolution at the UN and in the Security Council. I'm very curious to see how the United States approaches it. If they move to veto something right away, if they move to negotiate different language, I have no idea. the inner workings of the Trump administration in many ways still remain a mystery to me. I think actually in many ways they probably remain a mystery to lots of people who are working in the Trump administration. So we'll see what happens. But we've certainly seen the Trump administration, from the president and from Marco Rubio, criticize the Israeli government on the humanitarian stuff, and this was focused directly on that. So we'll see how it evolves.
And we just got word, by the way, miracles do happen, and pressure does what pressure sometimes does as well. Bibi Netanyahu just said that he's holding a press conference tonight, Wednesday evening. I think the first one he's held in months and months and months. So it's a very clear indication that even he understands that he has to go out and stiffen spines and explain himself to the Israeli public, given the events of the past few days. Moving on to the issue of humanitarian aid, and it's a big one. Israel, as we all know, halted all entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza in early March after the end of the first phase of the ceasefire, in order ostensibly to put pressure on Hamas in the ceasefire negotiations. That clearly has not had the desired effect, at least not yet. But as mentioned earlier this week, Netanyahu reversed himself and said that the situation in Gaza was nearing, quote unquote, a red line, and that Israel's closest friends across the world, and even in Washington, would not accept pictures of mass starvation, his words, from Gaza. So this week he allowed in limited amounts of aid to start going back into the Strip. Shira, as the expert on these issues, I mean, this is a big question, and again, you don't have to go into all the details, but give our listeners and also me and Michael a sense how bad really is the situation now in Gaza, if even Bibi Netanyahu is saying, okay, we have to give some kind of aid again after 11 weeks of no aid at all.
Where to even begin? So first of all, we have to say that I think the ceasefire ended, Israel ended the ceasefire, right? And during the ceasefire, we had
Correct.
really large quantities of aid. We're talking about 4,200 trucks per week. And based on the math that some people did in the Israeli, in the IDF and in Kogat, those were numbers that I think were leaked. There was some sort of an assessment that based on calories per person, it's really awful, right? But we're talking about between 60 and 70 something, 90-day, 80-day kind of math in terms of what would be enough. By the way, when you say humanitarian, it's the easiest to talk about food, but they're like hygiene kits, there are medical supplies, medicines. I mean, it's bigger than this. I'm not even going to shelter, education. I'm talking about the basics, but the basics is not just food. Okay, talk about even medicines. The Israeli politicians, like always the politicians, they said, oh, there's sufficient aid there for 6 months. And the humanitarian community all along said it's 2 to 3 weeks. The problem is that because of previous disagreements between Israel and the international community, the humanitarian community, the UN, that they, in Israeli words, say they have cried wolf about famine and other things before, and their threats have not materialized. We're not taking their threats seriously. I will tell you that sort of as an analyst, I had reservations about the professional assessments, even about the 60-day and 75 days and all these things, because, we know that in an effort to implement a ceasefire, what you counted as a truck wasn't always a truck. Sometimes it was a pickup truck. And when we count trucks, we don't necessarily count how many pallets there are, how many tons of food or supplies there are. So you take, the assumption was that each one of those things is a very big truck with food, and food could be potato chips, which we had a lot of trucks with potato chips going in and all this. So overall, I always thought that the Israeli numbers are, even the assessment that was professional, it was methodologically calculated, was too naive. And humanitarians were at some point, maybe they have different standards. The days and the weeks went by, and what we're starting seeing earlier on is indications of the food prices that have gone up increasingly, right, and gradually, very quickly. We've known that perishables have not been available in Gaza. There's a picture of like one market that we see, but I don't know if the angle of how many actual tables are in this market. Seems pretty small market, but essentially there are no perishables in Gaza. So it was very clear, I think, to anyone who looked that the situation was extremely bad even a few weeks ago. What is happening now? And this is where I don't know if it is now all of a sudden turned on the TV and saw the images from Gaza, or it was a combination of understanding that we get to what the military, right, said all along, that we're going to be at the red line at around this period, right, and we passed it already, with a combination of an idea that Israel would switch to a different model, which would be private companies securing, right, private military companies would secure a few distribution points where there's going to be assistance provided to the people who would come there, and those people would be vetted, and there's facial recognitions, a lot of like fancy stuff, a plan that looks really nice on paper and has zero chance of being implemented as described in the context of Gaza. We could go into it. So I don't know if it wasn't also just the rush to get this mechanism started. When they tried to get this mechanism launched, the humanitarian community came, and also the donor community said, hey, we're not playing ball with this thing. And then they said, you have to let us bring in aid in the previous model, which was, basically the UN bringing trucks in. But for that to happen, you have to be really in a red line mode. And for that, you have to blame the IDF, right? The IDF told me, and also the Trump administration. There could be two things here. Theoretically, it could be Witkoff and Trump really hearing from the Gulf. As far as we know, they may have showed him even a video, right? Clips from Gaza of what's happening there, right? We know it's effective with him to show. So I don't know what he saw there and if he heard about it. And Marco Rubio was in Turkey when he spoke about the humanitarian situation. So he could be hearing from others.
Right.
It could be invited pressure from Israel to say, hey, can you And there's speculation that it's invited, right? It's too coordinated to say all of a sudden that the American administration all of a sudden cares about the humanitarian situation in Gaza and for the first time speaks about it in those terms. And I don't know what's the theory. I think it's important that they say it. And I also know firsthand that when Israel decided to stop the humanitarian assistance, I had arguments with lots of people inside the IDF where they said, well, with Trump, he's not going to care. He's going to let us do whatever we want. And I said, I don't think you understand that no one in America likes to see hungry children on TV. This is not, there are things that, maybe they care less. They're less sensitive. You want to get the Blinken treatment or not. We can talk about this. And this goes to, but I don't know that by being a Republican administration, you're necessarily going to give a carte blanche to anything. There are things, that just are undone. So I think this was also an assumption with Israel, in addition to other assumptions on the Trump administration, that they're going to be doing whatever they want. So just fast forward to where we are today, Israel, there's the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that says that they pose conditions to Israel to address vulnerabilities with this mechanism that Israel is trying to launch. And now the Americans are taking custody over, but it's, I don't know, the right hand and the left hand, and it's too complicated to explain. I think we don't have the time for this, but Israel's hands was forced to allow trucks to come in the old model. The first day
as a bridge.
So we saw 9 trucks of baby food. Yesterday there were 93 trucks. UN, and this is the UN, right? When Israel said no UN, no nothing, now it's UN. As of today, I saw there are 56 trucks that went into Kerem Shalom, the crossing, but have not been picked up by the UN. I guess you need coordination inside. This is a drop in a bucket, a drop in the ocean. The needs far supersede this. And I also fear of what you call not just looting and not Hamas taking over this, but also just people trying to get a hold of the aid. And we've heard stories about, right, of mothers and daughters being crushed to death in a bakery when there was more food inside Gaza. And I'm really scared that this little aid is going to lead to other disasters beside the hunger and other things we're seeing there. So the situation is really, really bad. But I do hope we'll continue having this pressure. And Neri, also that domestically in Israel, I think it's the first time that there's a serious discussion about it, at least, of what is the use of not enabling food to come into Gaza. What does it serve? It doesn't make Hamas surrender, and it definitely doesn't help Israel's case in the world, even if there's no empathy here for the Palestinians.
And the person who argued this point, that Israel needed to move in aid into Gaza in order to enable the IDF to fight the war and to give the IDF time to, quote unquote, destroy Hamas, was Bibi Netanyahu in the beginning of the war, justifying not only to the Israeli public, but really to his allies in the government, why Israel needed to facilitate the entry of aid. He kind of forgot about that at some point, instituted a full blockade in early March, and a few days ago remembered it again. And he said it in the video he released. By the way, we've said from the beginning, we need to facilitate the entry of aid. It's where have you been? Where have you been? It's a self-inflicted goal.
But remember, Neri, when he said it initially, right at the beginning of the war, Israel didn't allow any aid to go in. It bombed convoys that went through Rafah, through Egypt in the beginning. Everything that Israel did on the humanitarian front was pressure from outside, mostly from the Biden administration. So I don't blame you. I have a deja vu also. So all of a sudden we have pressure from the Trump administration, or real pressure or fake pressure, but there's pressure, criticism on the Trump administration. So he's using the same arguments. And this is also, by the way, and the deja vu is also related to the bigger issue, or not bigger, but connected to it, is on the ceasefire, right? We will have a pressure on the humanitarian. We're going to allow the humanitarian. This is going to be the source of the argument as we stall in the ceasefire negotiations.
And Neri, I would argue that he hasn't really remembered it, because right now we're at the height of incoherent policy, right? So we can, as we knew would happen, but as hopefully now everybody can agree, preventing assistance from going in from March 1st up until this week did nothing to collapse Hamas. So, okay, we can stipulate that. So we're restoring aid. Well, if that's the case, then actually do it, right? Instead of the trickle of assistance that's going in, instead of sending it in and, as Shira notes, it's not getting distributed anywhere. How could it be with Israeli airstrikes at the pace of what they were earlier on in the war? You're not. It's like the Israeli government wants to get credit for saying, okay, now we're worried about starving people in Gaza, so we're going to let it in. But you're not really letting it in. Not even on the face of it. Not in an amount that's going to fool anybody. Not with any distribution mechanism that's going to fool anybody. It's like the entire thing is like I said, completely incoherent. They're clearly, seems to me, they're not actually trying to alleviate the problem, and they're not doing enough to even get credit for trying to alleviate the problem. And maybe that'll change, over the next few days and weeks. I sincerely hope that it does. But this is just silly. It accomplishes nothing.
Doesn't alleviate the suffering inside Gaza. Doesn't alleviate the pressure on Israel. So you've solved neither problem that you have as Israel. Michael, I wanted to ask you, what did you think of Shira's theory that this is actually not pressure from the Trump administration on Israel to allow aid back in? Steve Witkoff, Trump's special Middle East envoy, said the president was nothing if not a humanitarian, and that there would not be a humanitarian crisis in Gaza on Donald Trump's watch. So do you not think Donald Trump cares about the people of Gaza?
Wait, before you go to Michael, I'll just say it's not my theory. Yeah. It's some people around me were saying, because all of a sudden it was all the coincidence with the timing of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that people in Israel wanted to launch. Look to this. And if you wanted to prevent the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, I would argue that we've been in a humanitarian crisis in Gaza for the duration of his presidency. Okay, so that's my argument. But here, Michael, you respond.
Yeah, I was going to make a similarly snarky comment, which is that the avoiding a humanitarian crisis on President Trump's watch we're a bit too late for that. I'm pretty sure it's already happened. Listen, I think that it's very strange. President Trump is a guy who famously does not seem to have much empathy for many different groups or people. He genuinely seems to have empathy for the Israeli hostages. I think that's we've seen it over and over and over again from the campaign on until now. And he also seems to have genuine empathy for Palestinians in Gaza. Now, it comes out sometimes in strange ways, right? Like when he unveiled the Gaza Lago plan, kind of rooted it in that we have to do something for the Palestinians because they can't possibly be expected to stay in Gaza when it's like this. But he seems to actually have real empathy for the scenes of starving Palestinians in Gaza and Palestinians being killed in Gaza. So I'm not sure that. Not attributing this to Shira, understanding that like this is sort of a conspiracy theory that's floating around there. I'm not sure that this is some kind of feint cooked up by the White House and by Netanyahu. I think that Trump genuinely seems upset about what's going on. If he wasn't, I don't think you'd see it filtering down to folks like Marco Rubio, who clearly have gotten either direct orders or at least are smart enough to understand that when the boss says something, you should parrot it too. Where we now hear Marco Rubio too, not only talking about assistance having to go in, but also yesterday saying that it's not enough. So, if this is a coordinated PR stunt, it's being done very poorly. I think that the administration actually is annoyed by what's going on and upset by what's going on, and it doesn't seem to me like Netanyahu is responding fast enough for them.
But do you think it may be so maybe this is where it's sort of like they were trying to get to the big deal, right? Like, let's have this final deal, we will end the war. And that's why they were holding off criticism on the humanitarian stuff. But as they saw the negotiations were stalling, they were losing patience. And then they said, okay, we're going to start talking about the other stuff that does concern us, and we let Israel get away with, because we were going to do things different than Biden. I don't know. To me, it also, and again, just speaking with some officials from the Gulf a few weeks ago, it was very clearly the humanitarian issue was going to come up in his visit, but a lot of things came up in the visit. I don't know to what extent. So it just, the humanitarian situation, it's not like binary, right? One day there's no humanitarian crisis, another day there is, and all of a sudden to care, in a way, it must have been a combination of a few factors that made this sort of U.S. criticism come up. So strong against Israel also at the same time.
Yeah, and listen, I wrote and said repeatedly when Trump was elected and immediately after he took office, there are things that he says over and over again, and when he harps on an issue, it's generally a sign that he means it, and it's something that he actually cares about. And before he took office and after he took office, he said over and over and over, he wanted to see the Gaza war be concluded quickly. And it was unclear what he meant by that. If what he meant was a quick deal, which that seemed to be the initial thinking when he took office, and the ceasefire was basically forced on Netanyahu by Witkoff, or if he meant that the Israelis should just go in, all restraints are off, and finish things up quickly. At this point, I'm not sure it actually matters which he had in his head. It's pretty clear that the main point was finish it quickly, and it hasn't been finished quickly. And I think that's why we're seeing him lose patience. And this shouldn't be surprising, because, like I said, it was telegraphed, and people, not only me, noted it at the time that the Israelis were probably going to have a relatively short leash, even if the president didn't care what was on the end of kind of how you got to the end of the leash. The leash was short, and I think that we're seeing that now.
But surely, Michael, and this is going to be the last topic, which is a big one, Donald J. Trump is the topic. I think humanitarian aid is one thing, and my theory is that he talked to enough Arab leaders both before and during his trip to the Gulf, and they said, you have to do something to alleviate the suffering in Gaza. And okay, he told his people, I want to see aid go in, and this is the result. I think that's undoubtedly true as well. Yeah, but the second point is, I think it's separate from forcing Israel to stop the war. If Donald Trump really wanted Israel and Bibi Netanyahu really to end the war, he would get up there and say it, or he would tweet it, and that would be that.
We may get there, and According to the news today, the Mossad representatives from the Israeli negotiating team are still in Doha, but everybody else has left. Steve Witkoff is not there. So it's very possible that the next time the president talks to Witkoff and Witkoff says to him, "I'm not sure if the Israelis are trying their hardest, or I'm not sure if the Israelis are serious," we may end up with a Truth Social blast from the president. Directed at Netanyahu. That would that surprise anybody at this point? It wouldn't surprise me. I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen, but it's not all that far fetched. And if that happens, then Netanyahu is really in even deeper trouble politically. So if I were him, I would be trying to avoid it. But I don't see. I think he's trying to do it in all the superficial ways we talked about up front. I think he's trying to scam Trump and Witkoff, which is kind of how he approaches the United States generally, and Trump just doesn't seem like a guy who has infinite patience for it.
Shira, do you think we'll get a Truth Social blast or a Trump comment demanding Bibi Netanyahu end the war?
I think there are a lot of people that in Israel and around the world that are yearning for that, right? For that moment where he's willing to turn the screws, and then again, I don't think Netanyahu would be able to just say like, no, screw it, I let like 98 more trucks go in. I don't know the decision and the process with the Trump administration why they're not doing this. I agree with Michael. Seems to be quite a transparent president in the sense of like he does say what he means on a variety of things, right? He said he wants an agreement with Iran. He wants this. He wants an agreement with, a lot of things are happening in the world. We keep talking about this issue. So we might get there, and some of it would depend on what Israel does, right? This whole idea of Israel keep trying to send a message that everything's okay and we got Washington back. I'm not sure it's correct. There were reports that the Dermer meeting with Trump, in itself an achievement, right? Most countries don't have this access where a minister of strategic affairs meets with the president. But the reports that came out that this was the tone was pretty harsh in the meeting. And even if one paragraph in the Washington Post is not indicative of what is happening, and maybe you all reporters don't report the truth, it seems that there's been there's been a surge in reports from Washington that indicates that where there's an indication that there's less patience to the Israeli policy. And I don't know if you saw yesterday, I think it was the Wall Street Journal, the main, the front page of the Wall Street Journal, saw the Guardian talking about what Israel's doing in Gaza. I think to me is indicative that winds are shifting. I don't know when Trump is going to say, hey, I'm done with this. In Israel, you should be done. But as far as I'm concerned, couldn't be a moment too soon.
I will tell you, the tide definitely seems to be turning here. The Wall Street Journal, Shira, there's a new Senate resolution co-sponsored by every single Democrat in the Senate, save one, demanding for much more humanitarian assistance to go into Gaza. Every single Democrat except for one. Now, it's not like having 99 senators on it, but the Democrats tend to be pretty fractured on Israel. There's a real divide, and this got all of them except for one. So they're really. I can't stress enough how much Israeli government acting as if this is still October 2023 is just not flying. It's just not.
That's a good beat to end on. I'll just say for the record, since this is a recorded podcast, I'm still skeptical that Trump will actually bring the hammer down and force Israel to stop the war. Netanyahu mind prematurely. In other minds, not a moment too soon, as Shira alluded to, but I'm still skeptical. We've seen this movie before, earlier this year, where after Witkoff and Trump forced Netanyahu to accept the ceasefire deal, there was jubilation, and people here and in many other places said he's going to force Israel to essentially accept the second phase of the ceasefire and fully end the war, and by the way, get all the hostages back. There was no pressure that came down. And Netanyahu was given a green light to collapse the ceasefire, to restart the offensive, and they've, as of a few days ago, to bring it all back full circle, have actually restarted the offensive. Remains to be seen. We'll leave it there. Shira, Michael, as always, thank you so much for your time. I hope next time you're both on, we'll have happier news, more optimistic news. Let's hope.
Here's to hope.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Okay, thanks again to Michael Koplow and Shira Efron, as always, for their generous time and insights. Also, a special thanks to our producer, Jacob Gilman, and to all of you who support Israel Policy Forum's work. Do consider making a donation to Israel Policy Forum so we can keep being a credible source of analysis and ideas on issues such as these that we all care deeply about, including this podcast. And most importantly, thank you for listening.